Hi, it was really great to meet you today, and welcome to the first lecture, Traditional Democratic Theory. First, make sure you have your notebook, okay? Just like you would from a textbook or in class, you are going to want to take notes. You may do that in whatever style you want, but be sure to pay a particular attention to vocabulary. In AP Government, vocabulary is incredibly important and it builds over time. So you want to have that list of vocabulary to refer to as we go through the course. Second, if you have any questions or you need additional clarification, or if your learning style is just not centered around videos, this lecture corresponds with your textbook. We're in Chapter 1, we're looking at pages 13 through 15, and I highly encourage you to at least glance at those pages to supplement what we're learning here. At the end of this video, you're going to take a short comprehension quiz. This will make sure that we are all on the same page coming into class because we're going to apply that knowledge in the lesson on Wednesday or Thursday. That's why it's important to do one final thing. Please ask questions. At the bottom of your quiz, you'll see a small box for questions about comprehension, but also about extension, things you're just curious about in addition to clarification. I will do my best to make sure that I see all of those questions before we're together. Sound good? All right, let's get started. The overarching concept that we are going to look at is representative democracy. A democracy is a system of selecting policymakers and of organizing government so that policy represents and responds to the public's preference. I emphasize the word representative because, as you might have learned in previous years, there is also a direct democracy in which people directly participate in all decision making. This is highly impractical. In a representative democracy, the people choose their leaders to represent them and make decisions on their behalf. This is often connected with the idea of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, the people choose representatives to make decisions, and those representatives are therefore accountable to the people. The representatives derive their power from the people. They rule through popularity, popular sovereignty. In evaluating a representative democracy, we use Robert Dahl's traditional democratic theory. It's important to remember when looking at this theory that this is an ideal that democracies, especially representative democracies, should strive for. To measure this ideal, Dahl created 5 criteria for measuring his representative democracies. The first criteria is equality in voting. There are 2 aspects of this. First, does everyone have equal access to the voting booth? Second, once they've voted, do all of their votes count the same? This second concept is known as one person, one vote. Remember that. We're going to come back to it. A confusing part of equality in voting is the idea that voting does not need to be universal, it just needs to be representative. Does everyone have access if they wanted to? And if they wanted to, does their vote count the same? The second criteria is effective participation. This overlaps with the idea of equality in voting, but it touches every part of the decision-making process. In a representative democracy, because the people don't make the decisions, do they still have adequate and equal opportunity to express their preference throughout the decision-making process? The third criteria is enlightened understanding. This comes from James Madison's Marketplace of Ideas, but you might be more familiar with it as free press and free speech. If you wanted to find out about a topic, are there multiple viewpoints available, or does one person or group, namely the government, control the flow of information about this topic? You might be familiar with this from the dystopia books you read over the summer. There is not a lot of enlightened understanding in a dystopia. The fourth criteria, citizen control of the agenda, again overlaps with some of the other criteria we've already talked about. When we talk about the policy agenda, we talk about what issues politicians and leaders are talking about and how much importance they give them. Do citizens have proportional say in what those issues are that is equitable to their portion of the population? Or does one person or group have a disproportionate influence on the making of certain policy? This is where you most often see discussion about corruption in government and the outsized influence of money in politics. The final criteria is inclusion. This seems self-explanatory. Does the society include and give rights to all people? Is citizenship open to all in the country? It's important to note that the emphasis that Dahl puts on inclusion is about a political minority and not necessarily an ethnic or racial minority. That is not saying that those factors aren't important, but the democratic theory focuses primarily on the ability of the minority to dissent or have a different opinion. This is because in a representative democracy, we have majority rule. This means that in order to make a decision, there needs to be a vote, and the majority in that vote gets to make the decision. At the same time, the founders work really hard to protect minority rights. This guarantees rights and liberties to those who do not belong to the majority. This does not give them the right to disobey a decision simply because they don't like it, but it does protect their essential liberties from oppression by the majority group. These are ideals. It doesn't mean that the United States lives up to these all the time, but it sets criteria with which we can evaluate various democracies, including our own. We're looking for this as a benchmark or a goal. That's all. Make sure you ask if you have any questions and that you take the quiz, and I'll see you